Heaven is in My Heart, Part 3, a story from Genesis to Revelation, Chapter 20, Healings and Miracles of Jesus. Jesus had compassion for the suffering people he met and performed many healings and miracles. Very early in his ministry, he and his friends were at a wedding in Cana in Galilee when the host ran out of wine. His mother Mary gently asked him to work a miracle so as to not embarrass the wedding host. At the prompting of his mother, Jesus worked his first public miracle by turning 6 stone jars of water into the best quality wine. The 4 Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John have recorded all of the healings and miracles of Jesus. Jesus drove out evil spirits and demons from possessed people. These evil spirits and demons went out from many people as they recognized Jesus as the Messiah and the Son of God. Jesus ordered the demons not to speak. After being rejected in his hometown of Nazareth, Jesus and his disciples went to Capernaum to the house of Simon and Andrew. There he healed Simon's mother-in-law, who was sick with fever. She was immediately healed and got up and served Jesus and his disciples. Jesus healed a man suffering from a dreaded skin disease, possibly leprosy, which was a social and physical suffering in those days. The people of Capernaum brought a paralyzed man in a stretcher, but there were so many people who had flocked to hear Jesus preach in the synagogue that they had to drop the paralytic from the roof into the synagogue. Jesus applauded their faith and healed the paralyzed man. Later that day, Jesus and the disciples were crossing the Sea of Galilee in a boat when Jesus fell asleep, and there was a terrible storm. The disciples were terrified and woke Jesus up. Jesus rebuked the winds, and the storm ceased all at once. He chided the disciples for their lack of faith. On another occasion, Jesus went alone to a hilltop to pray and asked the disciples to go across to the other side of Galilee. In the early hours of the morning, there were strong winds, and the disciples were in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. Jesus walked toward them on the water, and the disciples, not knowing it was Jesus, were terrified. Jesus asked them to not fear and commanded the winds to quiet down. On the other side of Galilee in Gerasa, Jesus was met by a possessed man by a mob of evil spirits. That man wandered among the tombs and hills, screaming and cutting himself with stones. Jesus drove the evil spirits from the man into a herd of pigs that were nearby. All of pigs, about 2,000 of them, rushed down the side of the cliff and into the lake and drowned. When the owners of the pigs saw what had happened, they were very upset and asked Jesus to leave Galilee. So he was rejected not only in Nazareth but also in Galilee. A Jewish official named Jairus approached Jesus, seeking the healing of his daughter, who was very ill. Jesus was surrounded by a big crowd, and a woman who had severe bleeding for many years touched the edge of his garment, and she was healed instantly. As Jesus was on the way to Jairus' house, the news came in that his daughter had died. Jesus went into Jairus' house with Peter, James, and John, who were set apart by Jesus even among his disciples. He said to the girl, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I tell you to get up." She immediately got up, and Jesus asked her relatives to give her something to eat. In another instance, a centurion asked Jesus for the healing of his servant. He had such strong faith and humility that he told Jesus that he was not worthy for Jesus to come to his house. Instead, he requested that Jesus just say a word and heal his servant from where he was. Jesus was amazed at the faith of this Roman centurion, who was a Gentile, and healed the servant. Jesus was followed by thousands of men, women, and children who were eager to hear him and also were seeking healings. On one such occasion, the people were tired and hungry. Instead of sending them away to find their own food, Jesus asked the disciples to bring to him whatever little food they had. It was only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. He asked the disciples to seat the people in groups of 100 and groups of 50. Then he gave thanks to God, broke the bread, and asked the disciples to distribute the bread. When everyone had eaten their fill, they collected 12 baskets of leftover bread and fish. There were about 5,000 men and more women and children who had eaten that day. On another day, Jesus fed 4,000 people from 7 loaves of bread and a few fish. At the end of the meal, the leftover gathered filled 7 baskets. These miracles of feeding the crowds prefigure the institution of the Holy Eucharist, which Jesus performed after his arrival in Jerusalem and before his arrest on Holy Thursday. Jesus is the bread of life, the manna that has come down from heaven for all men. Jesus traveled to the region of Tyre, where a Gentile woman asked him to heal her daughter, who was afflicted with evil spirits. Jesus tested her faith by saying he had come only to the chosen people of the Jewish nation. The woman replied that even the dogs eat the scraps from their masters' tables. Jesus was filled with compassion and healed her daughter. Matthew chapter 15, verse 21 to 28. The disciples brought to Jesus a boy who was possessed by evil spirits that they were unable to drive out. Jesus told them that some evil spirits can only be driven out by much prayer and fasting. Jesus healed the boy and delivered him from the evil spirits. Mark chapter 9, verse 14 to 29. Jesus and his disciples then traveled to Sidon, where he healed a man who was born deaf and could not speak. When Jesus said, "Ephphatha," which means open up, he was healed immediately and was able to speak and to hear. In Bethsaida, Jesus healed a man who was born blind. On the way to Jerusalem and Jericho, Jesus healed Bartimaeus, who was blind from birth. Mark chapter 10, verse 46 to 52. Miracles like these were unheard of and brought many people to believe in Jesus Christ, the Messiah. This caused large crowds to follow him everywhere he went.